"Wake up, black girl." The judge, Whitmore, leaned close to Maya's ear and sneered. "My courtroom will never have room for a clerk like you." Then his voice dropped, colder, sharper. "You should know your place. Floors. Cleaning up after people who actually belong here. Not sitting at this table pretending you're their equal." Maya Williams felt the tremor run through her body before she could stop it. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the desk, but this time, she didn't stay silent. She lifted her head, her voice low but steady. "You switched it," she said. "This isn't my exam. You switched it." A few heads turned. The judge's eyes hardened. In one swift motion, his hand shot forward and gripped her hair, pulling her head back just enough to force her to feel it, not just the pain, but the control. "Careful," he whispered. "You don't get to accuse me of anything in my courtroom." Pain spread across her scalp, sharp and immediate. Maya's breath caught, her hand gripping the desk harder to steady herself. "You think anyone here is going to stand up for you?" he continued, tightening his grip slightly. "Look around." Chairs remained still. Pens kept moving. Eyes dropped back to paper. He leaned closer. "You're already out of your depth. Don't make it worse by pretending you're not." Then he released her. Maya's head dipped forward slightly as the pressure disappeared. She steadied herself, her breathing uneven for just a moment before she forced it back under control. The room resumed as if nothing had happened. Maya lowered her eyes to the paper again. The questions were still there. Dense, complex, deliberate. Not a mistake. A setup. She didn't speak again. She picked up her pen and began to write. Then footsteps returned. The judge stopped beside her again. This time, he didn't speak right away. His hand moved casually across her desk, as if inspecting something insignificant. Then he picked up the spare pen lying beside her paper, the one she always carried in case the first ran dry. Maya noticed the movement, but she didn't stop writing. A quiet click broke the air. He pressed the pen. Once, twice, testing it. Then, without warning, he drove the tip down hard into the back of her hand. The impact was sharp, sudden. Not enough to pierce deeply, but enough. Enough to break skin. Enough to send a jolt of pain shooting up her arm. Maya's breath hitched. A small drop of blood surfaced where the pen had struck. The judge leaned in slightly, his voice low, almost conversational. "Maybe pain will help you remember where you belong," he said. "You don't sit at this table. You don't write in this room. You don't compete with them." A faint, cruel edge slipped into his tone. "You endure, or you leave." Maya's vision blurred for a fraction of a second. Not from weakness, but from the sudden, stinging force of it. Her hand trembled once before she steadied it, pressing it lightly against the paper to stop the bleeding. No one spoke. Someone had seen, but no one moved. The judge straightened, placing the pen back down as if nothing had happened. "Don't take too long," he added quietly. "Failure looks worse when it's slow." Then he walked away. Maya stared at the paper for a second longer. Her hand throbbed, a dull, persistent pulse beneath the surface. The small stain of red on her skin stood out against everything else, real, undeniable. Her jaw tightened. In her mind, her mother's voice surfaced again, steady as ever. "What did you understand today that others didn't?" Maya exhaled slowly. The pain didn't disappear, but it settled, became background, became something she could carry instead of something that controlled her. She adjusted her grip on the pen, ignoring the sting. Then she read the first question again, carefully, precisely. Maya Williams did not look back. She lowered her pen to the paper once more and kept writing. Maya didn't look up after the pen struck her hand. The sting settled into a steady pulse, but her focus tightened instead of breaking. She read the first question again, forcing every word into clarity, building the structure in her mind before committing it to paper. Around her, the room resumed its quiet rhythm, but it no longer felt neutral. It felt watched. It felt controlled. Her pen moved, steady, deliberate. Identify the issue, establish standing, anchor the argument. She had done this 100 times in silence, just never like this. Footsteps returned. Not subtle this time, deliberate. Judge Whitmore stopped beside her again. close enough that the shadow of his body stretched across her paper. "You're still trying," he said, almost amused. "That's interesting." Maya didn't respond. He leaned down slightly, his voice low but carrying just enough. "Do you even understand what you're reading?" Her pen continued moving. "I'm asking you a question," he pressed. Maya's voice came out quiet, controlled. "Sir, I just need a little quiet to finish the exam." A faint chuckle escaped him. "Quiet?" he repeated. "You think this is about quiet?" He reached over her shoulder and tapped the top of her paper with 2 fingers. Not hard, but enough to interrupt her line of thought. "This isn't your level," he said. "You're wasting time pretending." Maya paused for half a second, then continued writing. He didn't step away. Instead, he dragged a chair from the adjacent table, the legs scraping loudly across the tile, and sat down beside her without asking. The sound cut through the room, drawing attention, but only for a moment. No one spoke. "You see them?" he said, nodding slightly toward the other candidates. "They're not struggling. They're not second-guessing every line. That's what preparation looks like." He leaned closer. "That's what belonging looks like." Maya kept her eyes on the paper. Her voice remained calm. "Sir, please." "Please what?" he interrupted sharply. "Please stop." A small pause. Then he leaned back slightly, crossing one leg over the other. "No," he said simply. He picked up the edge of her paper and let it fall back down. "Go on," he added. "Let's see how far you get." Maya's grip on her pen tightened, then steadied. She moved into the second part of the question, layering her argument carefully. The structure was forming. The logic held. A pen dropped somewhere behind her. Then another voice. Low, barely contained amusement. The room wasn't fully silent anymore. It was shifting, reacting, but never intervening. Judge Whitmore leaned forward again, closer this time. "You know what's going to happen, right?" he said. "You'll hand that in. They'll read the first page, maybe the second if they're feeling generous, and then they'll stop." Maya exhaled slowly, not lifting her head. "That's not your decision," she said quietly. A brief silence followed. Then a soft, humorless laugh. "No," he said, "but I can tell you how this ends." He reached across her desk again, this time picking up her spare pen, rolling it between his fingers as if considering it. "You think effort closes gaps like this?" he continued. "It doesn't. Effort just makes failure take longer." Maya didn't answer. She underlined a key precedent, anchoring her argument. The judge clicked the pen once, twice. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. Then he set it down, not gently, letting it hit the surface of the desk with a small crack that made her hand flinch just slightly before she forced it still. "There it is," he said. "That hesitation." Maya spoke again, softer now but firmer. "Sir, I need to concentrate." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Concentrate on what? Proving me wrong?" She didn't respond. "Or proving that you don't belong," he added. Maya finished the sentence she was writing before moving to the next line. Her pace didn't increase. It didn't slow. It held. Judge Whitmore stood abruptly, the chair scraping again as he pushed it back. He began pacing now, not just near her, but around her. Each pass just close enough to disrupt, to remind her he was there. "Time's running," he said casually, glancing at the clock on the wall. "You're already behind." Maya didn't look up. "You know what they call this?" he continued, watching someone drown slowly. A few candidates shifted again. One glanced toward Maya, then quickly looked away. Maya moved on to the next section of the exam. This one required interpretation, not just recall. A balancing test. A trap disguised as a routine question. She saw it immediately, and chose not to follow it. Her pen moved with renewed clarity, reframing the issue, cutting through the surface logic to the flaw beneath it. Judge Whitmore stopped pacing. He watched. For the first time, he didn't speak right away. Maya kept writing. Line by line, she built the argument. Steady, precise, unshaken. After a moment, his voice came again. Quieter now, but different. "You think this changes anything?" Maya didn't look up. "No matter what you write," he said, "you're still exactly who you were when you walked in here." Her hand paused for a fraction of a second, then continued. Inside, the answer came. Not spoken aloud, but certain. No, she wasn't. Because now, she understood something he didn't expect her to see. He wasn't trying to test her. He was trying to stop her. Before Maya writes the next line, let me ask you something. If you feel her pain in this moment, please hit the like button and tell us in the comments where you are watching from today, because someone near you might be watching this same story right now, feeling the same anger, the same hope, and the same need for justice. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next story of courage, truth, and the people who refuse to be broken. Maya adjusted her grip on the pen, ignoring the lingering pain in her hand. Then she continued writing, steady as before. Maya didn't realize when the room stopped being just a room. It shifted somewhere between the second and third question, not in sound, but in weight, as if every quiet decision not to act had settled into the air and thickened it. The clock on the wall ticked louder now, or maybe she was simply hearing it for the first time, each second marking not just time passing, but time being witnessed. Her pen moved steadily, finishing the final line of her third answer before she lifted it slightly, reviewing what she had written. The argument held. Clean. Structured. Not rushed. She didn't need perfection. She needed truth that could stand on its own. A voice broke the stillness. Not the judge's this time. You're still on that? It came from 2 seats ahead, a young man in a tailored navy suit who had turned just enough to look at her over his shoulder. His tone wasn't openly hostile. It didn't need to be. It carried something else, dismissal wrapped in curiosity. Maya didn't answer. He let out a short breath, almost a laugh. That's not even the same test, he added, glancing briefly toward the others, as if inviting quiet agreement. You know that, right? A second voice joined in, lower, from the far side. Maybe she doesn't, someone muttered. A few faint chuckles followed. Not loud, controlled, the kind that stayed just under the surface but carried clearly enough. Maya's eyes remained on her paper. Her hand didn't stop moving. Judge Whitmore's voice cut through again, sharper now that it wasn't directed only at her. Focus on your own work, he said, though there was no real correction in it. No authority meant to stop anything. If anything, it legitimized it, allowed it. The candidate in front of her turned back around, but not before giving one last glance, one that lingered just long enough to say what words didn't need to. Maya moved on to the next question. This one was different, more layered. It presented itself as a procedural issue, but beneath it was something else, a pattern. A repeated dismissal of claims tied to a subtle, buried, easy to overlook if you weren't looking for it. She slowed slightly, not from uncertainty, but from recognition. This isn't just a question, she thought. It's a record. Behind her, the judge's footsteps resumed. But there was a difference now. Less interruption, more watching. You're taking your time, he said after a moment, his tone quieter, almost reflective. That's new. Maya didn't respond. You think digging deeper is going to help you? He continued. Sometimes the simplest answer is the correct one. Her pen paused briefly above the page. Then she wrote a single word at the top of her outline. Pattern. You're overcomplicating it, he added. That's what happens when you don't understand the fundamentals. Maya spoke without looking up, her voice calm. Or when the fundamentals are wrong. The words settled into the room differently than anything else had so far. Not loud, not defiant, just clear. There was a pause, then a chair shifted somewhere to her left. Another candidate looked up, then quickly back down. Judge Whitmore didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice had changed, not softer, but more controlled. Careful, he said. That kind of thinking doesn't get rewarded here. Maya continued writing, because now she saw it completely. The way the cases were framed, the way certain arguments were dismissed not because they lacked merit, but because they challenged something deeper, something structural. She built her response accordingly, not just answering the question, but exposing the flaw beneath it. Step by step, precedent by precedent. The room had gone quieter again, but not the same quiet as before. This one carried awareness. People were listening now, even if they pretended not to. A pen tapped twice on a desk. Someone exhaled sharply. Another flipped pages faster than necessary. Judge Whitmore stopped moving. He was standing behind her again. "You really believe that?" he asked. Maya didn't turn. "Yes." A longer silence followed this time. Not empty, heavy. "You think you've found something no one else here can see?" he said finally. Maya finished her sentence before answering. "I think it was meant to be overlooked." Another pause. Somewhere across the room, a candidate whispered, "What is she even writing?" No one answered. Maya moved into the final section of the question, her argument tightening, becoming sharper, more direct. She wasn't writing to impress. She wasn't writing to convince the room. She was writing as if the only person reading it would be someone who understood exactly what was at stake. The judge exhaled slowly behind her. "You're not going to win this," he said. Maya didn't respond. "You can write whatever you want," he continued. "It won't change the outcome." Her pen moved across the final line of the page. Inside, something settled. Not anger, not fear, something steadier. "He keeps saying outcome," she thought, "like it's already decided." She turned the page and kept writing. Maya turned the page without hesitation, but something inside her had shifted. It wasn't just about solving anymore. It wasn't even about proving she belonged in that room. It was about understanding why the room had been built the way it was, and why someone like Judge Whitmore seemed so invested in making sure she never found her footing inside it. The next question sat heavier than the last, not because it was harder, but because it revealed more. A hypothetical corruption case, framed as a procedural exercise, written carefully enough to appear neutral, but structured in a way that guided the reader toward a specific conclusion, a conclusion that protected power. Maya's pen hovered for a fraction of a second before she began outlining again. Identify the actors, follow the decisions, trace the inconsistencies. She didn't rush. She didn't let the pressure of the room dictate her pace. Around her, the energy had changed. It wasn't open mockery anymore. It was something quieter, uneasy. People were aware now, even if they refused to admit it. "You're slowing down," Judge Whitmore said from behind her, his voice returning to that controlled, almost conversational tone. "That's what happens when you get lost." Maya didn't look up. "Or, when the question deserves more than a surface answer," she replied softly. A chair creaked somewhere to her right. Someone shifted again, listening. Whitmore stepped closer, close enough that his shadow cut across the top of her page. "You keep talking like there's something hidden here," he said. "There isn't. It's straightforward. Apply the rule. Move on." Maya underlined a clause in the question, a small detail most would skip. "If it were straightforward," she said, "you wouldn't need to say that." The silence that followed wasn't immediate. It grew, spreading outward as the meaning settled. Whitmore let out a short breath through his nose. "Confidence," he said. "That's what this is. Not competence." Maya's pen didn't stop. She began building her argument differently this time, not following the structure the question suggested, but rearranging it, exposing the imbalance in how the facts were presented. The deeper she went, the clearer it became. The case wasn't neutral. It had been shaped, tilted, designed to lead to a specific outcome while appearing objective. Behind her, the judge's footsteps stopped again. "You think rewriting the question makes you smarter?" he asked. Maya answered without lifting her eyes. "No. It makes the answer honest." A faint murmur passed through the room, quickly suppressed. Whitmore's tone hardened slightly. "Honesty isn't what's being evaluated here." Maya paused just long enough to let that settle, then continued writing. "Maybe it should be." For the first time, the judge didn't respond immediately. Maya reached the midpoint of her answer and leaned back slightly, just enough to ease the tension in her shoulders before continuing. Her hand still throbbed faintly where the pen had struck her, the skin tender, a dull reminder of what had already been done to stop her. But it no longer felt like a threat. It felt like evidence. She returned to the page, her argument sharpening, connecting the procedural missteps to a broader pattern of decisions that favored one side repeatedly, not by accident, not by oversight, by design. Across the room, one of the candidates let out a quiet, frustrated sigh. Another tapped his pen against the desk, then stopped when the sound felt too loud. No one spoke now, not even in whispers. The tension had shifted from dismissal to something closer to discomfort. Whitmore moved again, slower this time, circling her desk once before stopping at her side. "Let me ask you something," he said. "You actually believe any of this will matter?" Maya finished her sentence before answering. "It already does." He leaned slightly closer. "To who?" She placed a period at the end of her paragraph. "To anyone who reads it honestly." A longer pause followed. Then he straightened, adjusting his sleeve with a small, precise motion. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "You're treating this like it's real." Maya's pen moved to the next line. "It is real," she said. "That's why it's written this way." The judge's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The clock ticked on the wall. A page turned somewhere behind her. Maya reached the final section of the question, where the recommendation was required. Most candidates would keep it safe, narrow, procedural. She could feel that expectation built into the structure itself. Stay within the lines. Don't question the frame. But the frame was the problem. Her pen slowed slightly, not from uncertainty, but from precision. Every word mattered here, not just what she said, but how she said it. Behind her, Whitmore spoke again, softer now. "You don't get to change the system by pointing at it," he said. "That's not how this works." Maya wrote the first line of her conclusion. "Maybe not," she replied, "but you can expose it." Another silence followed, this one deeper. She continued writing, laying out her recommendation clearly. Not just a resolution to the hypothetical case, but a call for further review, for scrutiny, for accountability. She didn't soften it. She didn't disguise it. She let it stand exactly as it was. When she reached the final line, she didn't rush the ending. She wrote it carefully, then set her pen down for a brief moment, reviewing what she had done. The argument held. She picked the pen up again and turned the page. Behind her, the judge finally stepped back. "Not far, but enough. You've gone further than you should have," he said quietly. Maya didn't turn. She began reading the next question, and kept going. Maya didn't rush into the next question, but she didn't hesitate either. The page in front of her carried a different weight now, not because the questions had changed, but because she had. Whatever line had been drawn at the beginning of the exam had already been crossed. There was no version of this where she walked out quietly and pretended none of it happened. Her hand steadied over the paper, the dull ache from earlier still present, but no longer sharp enough to interrupt her thinking. Pain had a way of fading when something more important demanded space. The next question was longer than the others, spanning nearly 2 full pages. Maya scanned it once, then again, letting the structure reveal itself, piece by piece. A federal civil rights claim tied to municipal liability, framed as a question of administrative oversight. At first glance, it looked like a standard application problem, but buried in the language were inconsistencies, timelines that didn't align, decisions that contradicted established procedure, and most telling of all, a pattern of internal reports that had been ignored. Maya's pen hovered briefly. "This isn't theoretical," she thought. "This is built from something real." "You're slowing down again," Judge Whitmore said from behind her, his voice quieter now but more deliberate. "That's what happens when the material finally outruns you." Maya didn't respond. She began outlining the framework of her answer, mapping out the sequence of events described in the question, isolating the points where the system had failed not accidentally, but repeatedly. Whitmore stepped closer. "You're looking for something that isn't there," he continued. "It's a simple liability question. You don't need to reinvent it." Maya spoke without lifting her head. "If it were simple, it wouldn't be written like this." A faint shift in the room followed. Someone leaned back in their chair. Another candidate stopped writing for a second too long before forcing themselves to continue. The judge let out a quiet breath. "You think you're uncovering something," he said. "You're not. You're overcomplicating it because you don't trust the obvious answer." Maya's pen moved steadily as she wrote the first line of her response. "Or because the obvious answer protects the wrong outcome." Silence. Whitmore didn't reply immediately. When he did, his voice had lost its earlier edge and taken on something tighter, more controlled. "That's not your concern," he said. Maya underlined a key phrase from the question before responding. "It is if I'm the one answering." Across the room, a candidate shifted, glancing briefly toward her before looking back down. The tension had changed again. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was awareness. Maya continued building her argument, tracing the chain of decisions outlined in the case. Each step led to the next, each omission reinforcing the same conclusion. This wasn't negligence. It was pattern. Behind her, Whitmore began pacing again, slower than before. "Let me make something clear," he said. "This isn't a courtroom. You don't get to make speeches about what should be. You answer the question, or you fail." Maya's pen paused for half a second, then continued. "I am answering it. Not the way it's meant to be answered," he snapped. Maya finished the sentence she was writing before speaking. Then maybe it wasn't meant to be answered honestly. The words settled harder than anything she had said so far. A chair creaked loudly near the front of the room. Someone shifted again, the sound of paper turning more abrupt now, less controlled. Whitmore stopped pacing. For a moment, he said nothing. Maya kept writing. She moved into the analysis section, connecting the procedural failures to constitutional implications. Drawing from precedents she had studied alone, cases that hadn't been assigned, arguments she had built from scratch because no one had guided her through them. "You think citing cases makes you right," Whitmore said finally. Maya didn't look up. "No, it makes the argument testable." He stepped closer again, but this time he didn't reach for anything. He just stood there, watching the page as she wrote. "And if it doesn't pass?" he asked. Maya's pen moved across the line, finishing a citation before she answered. "Then it fails on its own. Not because someone decided it should." Another silence followed. The clock ticked, somewhere behind her. A pen dropped and rolled across the floor before being quietly retrieved. No one spoke. Maya reached the final section of the question, the recommendation. This was where most answers would narrow, pulling back from risk, settling into something safe, something acceptable. She didn't pull back. Her pen slowed, not from doubt, but from precision. She laid out her conclusion clearly, connecting the pattern of decisions to systemic failure, recommending not just resolution, but review, oversight, accountability. Behind her, Whitmore exhaled slowly. "You're writing like someone's going to act on this," he said. Maya didn't look up. "They might." A faint, humorless laugh escaped him. "You really believe that?" She placed the final period at the end of her paragraph. "It only takes one person who does." The room felt smaller again, not physically, but in the way attention had narrowed. Even those who refused to look directly at her were listening now, their awareness impossible to hide completely. Whitmore didn't respond. For the first time since the exam began, he stepped back without another word. Maya read over her answer once, quickly but carefully. The structure held. The logic was clean. There were no gaps she could see. She turned the page and moved on. Maya turned the page and immediately understood this was the kind of question designed to break rhythm. Not because it was harder, but because it forced a shift in thinking. Up to this point, the problems had followed a pattern, structured, layered, but consistent in their internal logic. This one fractured that, a multi-part scenario involving judicial discretion, evidentiary suppression, and a final ruling that, on its surface, appeared legally defensible, but something underneath it didn't align. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't loud. It was subtle enough that most people would accept it and move on. Maya didn't move on. Her pen rested against the paper as she read it again, slower this time, letting the inconsistencies rise instead of searching for them directly. A timeline that skipped justification, a ruling that cited precedent, but not the correct one. A decision that leaned heavily on discretion where the law required constraint. Behind her, the judge's voice returned, quieter now, almost patient. "You've been pushing every question past where it needs to go," Whitmore said. "At some point, that stops looking like insight and starts looking like confusion." Maya didn't look up. Or it starts revealing what wasn't supposed to be seen, she replied. A pause followed. Longer this time. Whitmore stepped closer again, but his presence had changed. It wasn't aggressive in the same way anymore. It was measured, calculated. You think this is about uncovering something hidden, he said. It's not. It's about showing you can follow instructions. Maya's pen moved, drawing a clean line under a key phrase in the question. Instructions don't override the law, she said quietly. Across the room, someone shifted sharply, the sound of a chair leg scraping louder than before. Another candidate stopped writing entirely for a few seconds, then forced their hand to move again. Whitmore let out a slow breath. You're still under the impression this is a merit system, he said. That if you get the answer right, everything else falls into place. Maya continued outlining her argument, separating the facts from the assumptions embedded in the question. No, she said. I'm under the impression that if the answer is right, it stands on its own. The judge didn't respond immediately. Instead, he moved around her desk, stopping just in front of her this time, where she couldn't ignore his presence, even if she didn't look up. He reached for the corner of her paper again, lifting it slightly, scanning a few lines before letting it fall back into place. You're building something that no one asked for, he said. Maya finished her sentence before answering. That doesn't make it wrong. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. It makes it irrelevant. For a brief second, Maya's pen stopped. Not from doubt, from recognition. That's what this is, she thought. Not stopping me from being right. Making it not matter if I am. Her grip tightened slightly, then steadied again. She moved into the analysis, connecting the flawed ruling to the misuse of discretion, showing how the decision had bypassed required standards under the guise of judicial authority. It wasn't enough to say it was wrong. She had to show exactly where and how it broke. Whitmore straightened, stepping back half a pace. You're still writing like someone's going to read all of this, he said. Maya didn't look up. They might. He shook his head slightly. No, they'll skim it. They'll look for structure, for efficiency, for compliance. Not this. He gestured lightly toward her paper. This is something else. Maya wrote the next line carefully. Then, maybe they'll have to slow down. A faint, almost imperceptible shift passed through the room again. Whitmore's voice dropped. You're not in a position to make anyone do anything. Maya's pen moved steadily across the page. Neither are you, she said quietly. That landed differently. For the first time, the judge didn't respond right away. The silence stretched. Maya continued writing, building the final part of her argument, connecting the flawed decision to broader implications, showing not just that it was wrong, but that it set a precedent for future misuse. Behind her, Whitmore took a step back, then another. You think this exposes something, he said finally. Maya didn't look up. It does. And what happens after that? He asked. She placed a period at the end of her sentence. That depends on who's willing to see it. Another pause. The clock ticked louder now. Or maybe everything else had quieted enough for it to take over. A candidate near the front shifted again, this time turning slightly in his chair before catching himself and facing forward. No one wanted to be seen watching, but everyone was aware now. Completely aware. Maya reached the final section of the question. The recommendation. She didn't hesitate. Her pen moved with the same steady precision, laying out her conclusion clearly, directly, without softening it to fit expectations. She didn't adjust her tone to match what would be easier to accept. She wrote it as it needed to be written. Behind her, Whitmore exhaled slowly. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he said. Maya finished her final line. No, she replied. I'm making it accurate. Silence. No response. She reviewed her answer quickly, scanning for gaps, for weaknesses. There were none she could see. Not in the logic, not in the structure. She turned the page and continued. Maya turned the next page and immediately felt the shift. This wasn't just another question. It was the core of the exam, the kind designed to separate those who followed structure from those who understood consequence. The scenario was longer, more detailed, built around a judicial review involving dismissed evidence in a criminal case tied to financial misconduct. At first glance, it read like a standard suppression issue, but as her eyes moved line by line, something underneath it sharpened. Not just inconsistency this time. Familiarity. Her pen didn't move yet. She read it again, slower, isolating each element. The timeline, the evidentiary ruling, the justification, the language used to defend it. Then it clicked. Not entirely. Not enough to name it, but enough to feel it. I've seen this structure before. Behind her, the room had gone unusually still. Not silent in the ordinary sense, but contained, as if everyone was aware that something had changed but couldn't identify what. Judge Whitmore spoke again, but this time, there was something different beneath his tone. Less control, more edge. "Don't stall," he said. "That won't help you now." Maya lowered her pen to the page and began outlining, but her movements were slower, more deliberate. She wasn't just answering anymore. She was verifying, cross-checking the internal logic of the case against what she knew to be true about how these decisions were supposed to work. "You're hesitating," Whitmore added, stepping closer. "That's usually the point where people realize they've gone too far." Maya spoke quietly, almost to herself, or where they realize something doesn't add up. A pause. Then, sharper, "It adds up exactly the way it's supposed to." Maya's pen moved again, but this time, her notes shifted. Instead of outlining the answer, she began mapping discrepancies, dates that aligned too cleanly, justifications that leaned on precedent without fully applying it, a suppression ruling that bypassed procedural safeguards under the guise of urgency. Her chest tightened slightly, not from fear, but from recognition. This isn't hypothetical. The thought didn't come with certainty, but it carried weight, enough to change how she approached the rest of the question. Behind her, Whitmore's voice dropped lower. "You're overthinking it again," he said. "You've done that all morning." Maya didn't look up. "Because it keeps repeating," she replied. "Repeating what?" he pressed. She finished a line before answering. "The same pattern." Silence followed, longer than before. Maya could feel it ripple outward. Someone in the back shifted abruptly. Another candidate stopped writing entirely, pen hovering above the page. Whitmore didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice had changed again. Not louder, tighter. "There is no pattern," he said. Maya's hand paused for half a second, then continued. "There is," she said quietly. The air in the room shifted again. Whitmore stepped around her desk, moving into her line of sight now. For the first time, Maya looked up. Not fully, just enough to meet his eyes for a brief second, before returning to the paper. It was enough. Whatever he saw in her expression, it registered. "You're making a mistake," he said. Maya's pen moved again. "No," she replied. "I'm recognizing one." The judge's jaw tightened, just slightly. He reached for the edge of her paper again, but this time he didn't lift it. He just let his fingers rest there for a second, as if grounding himself. Then he pulled his hand back. "You think this gives you leverage?" he asked. Maya didn't respond. "Because it doesn't," he continued. "It gives you a reason to fail." She wrote the next line of her argument, connecting the suppression ruling to a broader misuse of judicial discretion. Not just flawed, intentional, structured to hold under surface-level review but collapse under scrutiny. Behind her, the room had gone completely still now. No shifting, no tapping, just the sound of her pen moving across the page. Whitmore spoke again, quieter than before. "You don't understand what you're stepping into." Maya finished her sentence. "I understand enough." A pause. Then, more sharply, "No, you don't." Maya didn't look up. Then, "Explain it." The words hung there, an invitation, a challenge. For a moment, it seemed like he might respond, like he might say something that crossed whatever line he had been holding just short of all morning. But he didn't. Instead, he stepped back, and for the first time since the exam began, he stopped interfering. Not completely. He was still there, still watching, but the interruptions stopped. The commentary stopped. The pressure shifted into something else. Observation. Maya continued writing. now fully committed to the direction she had chosen. She laid out the inconsistencies clearly, step by step, showing how the ruling deviated from required standards, how the justification failed under closer examination, how the outcome aligned too conveniently with the interests it claimed to evaluate neutrally. Her argument wasn't aggressive. It didn't need to be. It was precise. That made it harder to dismiss. As she moved into the final section, the recommendation, she didn't hesitate. She didn't soften the conclusion. She wrote it exactly as it followed from the analysis. The case required review. Not optional, not suggested. Required. She placed the final period carefully, then paused just long enough to read over what she had written. The logic held. The structure was clean, and the implication was clear. She turned the page. Behind her, Whitmore exhaled slowly. "You should have left it alone," he said quietly. Maya didn't respond. She began reading the next question, and kept going. Maya turned the page, and this time she didn't immediately start reading line by line. She paused, just for a second, letting the quiet settle around her, measuring the space she had created through nothing but persistence. The room hadn't returned to what it was at the beginning. It couldn't. Too much had been seen, even if no one was willing to name it. The silence now carried weight, not indifference. Then she looked down. The next question was shorter, but that made it more dangerous. A condensed scenario, tightly written, leaving little room for interpretation on the surface. Judicial ethics, conflict of interest, recusal standards. It appeared straightforward, almost deceptively so. But Maya had already learned what that meant. The simpler the framing, the more carefully it had been constructed. Her eyes moved across the paragraph once, then again. There it was. A judge presiding over a case involving financial misconduct tied to a private entity. No disclosure of prior connection. No recusal. The justification? No. Direct conflict. Established. Maya's pen hovered above the page. No direct conflict. The phrase repeated in her mind. Not because it was unclear, but because it was familiar. Too familiar. Behind her, there was no immediate voice this time. No interruption. No deliberate noise. That absence spoke louder than anything before. Maya began outlining. Not quickly, not cautiously, precisely. She separated the facts from the framing, isolating what had been stated from what had been implied. The ethical standard wasn't ambiguous. It never had been. It wasn't about direct conflict. It was about reasonable appearance, about trust, about whether the integrity of the decision could be questioned by anyone outside the room. Her pen touched the paper. She wrote the standard clearly. Then she applied it. A chair shifted behind her, slower this time, as if the person moving was aware that even small sounds carried further now. Someone exhaled quietly. Another candidate flipped a page but didn't write. Maya continued. She mapped the connection, even though the question tried to minimize it. Financial overlap. Prior advisory role, indirect benefit. Each piece alone might be dismissed. Together, they formed something else entirely. Pattern, she thought again. The same word she had written before, the same thread running through everything. Behind her, a voice finally returned. Not Whitmore's. Lower. Uncertain. "That's not how I read it," someone said quietly from across the room. Another voice responded, just as soft. "It says no direct conflict." Maya didn't look up. She wrote the next line carefully. "Ethics does not require direct conflict. It requires the absence of reasonable doubt." The room stilled again. Then Whitmore's voice came back, but it was different now. Controlled. Measured. "This is not a discussion," he said, addressing the room, but not looking away from Maya. "Continue your work." The brief ripple of voices stopped immediately. Pens resumed. Chairs settled, but the awareness didn't disappear. Maya continued writing, building her argument step by step, not rushing, not pausing unnecessarily. She wasn't reacting anymore. She was documenting. Behind her, Whitmore didn't move. "You're making assumptions," he said after a moment. Quieter now, but direct. Maya didn't respond immediately. She finished the sentence she was writing, then spoke without looking up. "No, I'm following the standard. There's a difference," he said. Not if the standard is applied correctly, she replied. A pause followed, long enough to register. Whitmore shifted his weight slightly, the faint sound of his shoe against the floor marking it. You think writing it that way changes what happened? He asked. Maya's pen moved across the page, steady as before. No, she said. It clarifies it. Another silence. This one heavier, because now it wasn't just about the answer. It was about what the answer implied. Maya reached the midpoint of the question and moved into analysis, connecting the ethical violation to the broader consequences. Not just the ruling itself, but the damage to trust, to legitimacy, to the system that relied on the perception of fairness as much as the reality of it. Her hand didn't tremble anymore. The pain had faded into something distant, no longer competing for attention. She wrote the conclusion without hesitation. The judge should have recused. The failure to do so compromised the integrity of the proceeding. The decision, regardless of its legal grounding, was ethically unsound. She placed the final period. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she read it once, quickly, clean, direct, unavoidable. Behind her, Whitmore exhaled slowly. You're very certain, he said. Maya didn't turn. The standard is. He didn't respond, but he didn't move away either. That was new. Before, he had circled, interrupted, pressed. Now he stayed, watching, measuring. Maya turned the page. There were fewer questions left now. She could feel it not from the count, but from the way the exam had been structured. Everything was narrowing, closing in. The next question began immediately, without space for hesitation. A final scenario, more complex than the last, combining elements from everything that came before. Procedure, ethics, discretion, accountability. Maya read the first line, then the second, and stopped. Not because she didn't understand it, because now she understood too much. Her pen rested lightly against the page. Behind her, Whitmore spoke again, softer than before. Careful, he said. Maya didn't look up, but this time, she didn't answer either. She began writing. Maya didn't rush the final question, even though something inside her already understood what it was asking. This wasn't just the hardest part of the exam. It was the point of it. Everything before had been preparation, conditioning, misdirection. This was where it converged. Her eyes moved slowly across the scenario. A composite case. Judicial discretion applied across multiple rulings, suppressed evidence, dismissed claims, ethical conflicts minimized under procedural language. It wasn't one mistake. It was a system of decisions reinforcing each other, each one justifiable on its own, but together forming something else entirely. Her pen didn't move yet. This isn't just a case, she thought. This is a pattern of behavior. Behind her, Whitmore didn't interrupt. That was the most unsettling part. He knew she saw it. The room had gone completely still again, but not out of indifference, out of anticipation, the kind that builds when something is about to be said that cannot be taken back. Maya lowered her pen to the page. She didn't start with the facts. She started with the structure. She mapped the sequence of rulings, not as isolated decisions, but as a chain, each link reinforcing the next, each justification narrowing the possibility of challenge, each outcome aligning too consistently with one side of the case. Her writing slowed not from hesitation, but from precision. Every word had to hold. Every connection had to be clear enough that it couldn't be dismissed as interpretation. Behind her, Whitmore spoke. Finally, quiet, controlled. Think carefully, he said. Maya didn't look up. This is where people lose perspective, he continued. They start connecting things that aren't meant to be connected. Her pen continued moving. Because they want there to be something bigger, he added. Something that justifies the effort they've put in. Maya finished the line she was writing before she answered. Or because it's already there. A pause followed. Then, sharper. You don't know that. Maya wrote the next sentence. I know what it shows. The tension in the room shifted again. Not outward, inward. People weren't just listening anymore. They were processing, comparing what they had written to what they were hearing, even if they never admitted it. Whitmore stepped closer, But he didn't reach for anything this time. He stood just behind her shoulder, close enough to see the lines forming on the page. "You're building an argument that goes beyond the question," he said. Maya didn't stop writing. "The question goes beyond itself. That's not how this works." "It is, if the answer requires it." Silence. Maya moved into the analysis, breaking down each ruling in the scenario, showing how the discretion applied in one instance contradicted the standard applied in another, how evidence was treated differently depending on its source, how ethical concerns were minimized in one context and enforced strictly in another. It wasn't random. It was consistent. That was the problem. "You're assuming intent," Whitmore said. Maya's pen paused for half a second, then continued. "No," she said. "I'm identifying effect." He exhaled slowly. "Effect doesn't prove anything. It reveals what's being protected," she replied. Another pause. Longer. Heavier. Across the room, no one moved. Even the smallest sounds had stopped. No tapping, no shifting, no quiet breaths escaping too loudly. Just the steady movement of her pen. Maya reached the midpoint of her answer and leaned back slightly, just enough to reset her posture before continuing. Her hand still carried the faint trace of pain, but it no longer mattered. Not in this moment. She moved into the final section. Recommendation. This was where the exam expected restraint. Narrow conclusions. Safe language. Maya didn't write safely. She wrote clearly. The pattern of rulings demonstrated a consistent misuse of judicial discretion that warranted review. Not optional. Not speculative. Necessary. The integrity of the process had been compromised, not by a single decision, but by the accumulation of them. Behind her, Whitmore spoke again, quieter now than at any point before. "You're crossing a line." Maya didn't stop. "The moment you put that on paper," he continued, "you're not answering a question anymore." Her pen moved across the final line. "I know," she said. A pause. Then, more quietly, "Then why do it?" Maya placed the final period. "Because it's already true." Silence. Complete. She didn't move immediately. She let the answer sit there, fully formed, before she read it once more. Not searching for approval. Not anticipating rejection. Just verifying that it held. It did. She set her pen down for a brief second, flexing her fingers slightly before picking it back up again. There were no more questions. She had finished. Before anyone else. The realization didn't come with relief. It came with clarity. The room that had tried to reduce her to something smaller had watched her complete something they hadn't even been given. Behind her, Whitmore didn't speak again. He didn't need to. Because now, for the first time since the exam began, the silence didn't belong to him. It belonged to her. Maya didn't raise her hand when she finished. She didn't shift in her seat or look around to measure anyone else's progress. She simply placed her pen down beside the paper, not with hesitation, but with finality, as if the act itself marked the end of something larger than the exam. For a moment, her hand remained still, the faint soreness beneath her skin, now distant, almost irrelevant. The room, however, reacted. Not immediately, not dramatically, but subtly enough that it couldn't be ignored. A chair creaked. Someone paused mid-sentence on their page. Another candidate glanced up, then quickly looked back down, as if eye contact itself might reveal too much. Then it started. "She's done?" a voice whispered from the far side. "That's impossible," another replied under their breath. "We're not even halfway through." A soft, disbelieving chuckle followed. Maya didn't look up. "You don't finish something like that in this time," the first voice continued, slightly louder now. "Unless you're guessing. Or skipping," someone added. A faint ripple of restrained laughter moved through the room, the kind that carried judgment without needing to say it directly. Maya's eyes remained on the paper in front of her, but she wasn't reading it anymore. She was listening, not to the words themselves, but to what they revealed. They didn't think she had done it. Not really. Judge Whitmore finally moved again. His footsteps were slower now, less deliberate than before, as if the certainty he had carried earlier had begun to fracture, even if only slightly. He stopped beside her desk, looking down at the completed pages. "You finished," he said. It wasn't a question. Maya didn't look up. Yes. A pause followed. Then, quieter. All ready. Maya nodded once. Whitmore's eyes moved across the top page, not reading fully, just scanning. His expression didn't change much, but something in his posture shifted, almost imperceptibly. Behind him, another candidate spoke again, this time not bothering to lower his voice enough. "There's no way that's right." A second voice agreed. "She rushed it. That's obvious. Probably didn't understand half of it." A third added. More murmurs followed. Maya finally lifted her head, not to engage them, but simply to meet the room for a brief moment. Her expression didn't carry anger. It didn't need to. It carried something else. Certainty. She looked back down again. Whitmore straightened slowly. "If you're done," he said, his tone returning to something more formal, "you can submit your paper." Maya reached forward, gathering the pages carefully, aligning them before placing them at the edge of the desk. Her movements were calm, unhurried, as if she were finishing something routine, not something that had reshaped the entire room. A candidate near the front leaned back slightly, watching her now without pretending not to. "You really think that's enough?" he asked. Maya didn't answer. Another voice followed, sharper. "You know they're going to read that, right? Every line." She met his gaze briefly. "I expect them to." A faint scoff. "Then you should have taken more time." Maya's voice remained steady. "Time doesn't fix what's wrong." The room fell quiet again. Whitmore stepped forward, picking up her paper before anyone else could say anything further. For a brief second, his fingers rested on the top page, pressing down slightly, as if testing the weight of what had been written there. Then he lifted it. No comment. No immediate reaction. Just silence. He turned and walked toward the front of the room, placing her paper separately from the others. Not with emphasis. Not with carelessness. Just apart. That didn't go unnoticed. A few candidates exchanged glances. Someone leaned closer to another, whispering something too low to hear. The tension shifted again, no longer directed only at Maya, but at what had just happened. Maya remained seated. For the first time since the exam began, she allowed herself to lean back slightly, her shoulders easing just enough to release the tension she had held for hours. The room still existed. The judge still stood at the front. The others were still writing, still competing, still trying to finish what she had already completed. But something fundamental had changed. Not in them. In here, the clock continued ticking on the wall, but it no longer felt like pressure. It felt like distance. Minutes passed. One by one, other candidates began finishing. Not as quickly, not as steadily, but eventually, papers were collected, stacked, organized. The formal structure of the exam reasserted itself, trying to return everything to normal. But normal had already been disrupted. When the final paper was gathered, the proctor cleared his throat quietly. "That concludes the examination," he said, his voice careful, neutral. "You may collect your belongings." Chairs moved. Bags were picked up. Quiet conversations began, low and controlled, but filled with the kind of speculation that comes after something unexpected. Maya reached for her bag, lifting it onto her shoulder. She didn't rush. She didn't linger. As she stood, Whitmore spoke again, his voice cutting through the movement. "Miss Williams." The room slowed. Not completely, but enough. Maya turned. He held her paper in his hand. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said, "We'll be reviewing this carefully." Maya met his gaze, steady. "I hope you do." A brief silence followed. Then she turned, walked toward the door, and stepped out into the hallway without looking back. Behind her, the room remained, but whatever had happened inside it no longer belonged there alone. The hallway outside the courtroom felt warmer, but not in a comforting way. It was the kind of warmth that came from movement, from voices layered over one another, from people trying to return to something ordinary after witnessing something they didn't quite understand. Maya stepped out into it without slowing, her hand tightening slightly around the strap of her bag as the door closed behind her with a muted click. For a moment, she just stood there, not because she didn't know where to go, but because the shift from that room to this space felt abrupt, like stepping out of pressure into air that hadn't caught up yet. Then the voices followed. They're going to tear that apart. She finished way too fast. I've seen people try that before. Doesn't end well. The words weren't directed at her directly, but they weren't hidden either. A few of the candidates had stepped into the hallway behind her, their conversations low but intentional enough to carry. Maya didn't turn. She started walking. Her steps were steady, measured, the rhythm grounding her more than anything else. The courthouse corridor stretched ahead, long and lined with closed doors, each one marked with names and titles that carried weight in ways she had spent years trying to understand. Behind her, the door to the exam room opened again. Footsteps followed, faster this time. "Miss Williams," she stopped, not immediately. One step, then another, then she turned. It wasn't Whitmore. It was the proctor. He approached with a kind of hesitation that hadn't been present inside the room. His expression caught somewhere between concern and restraint. "They've already started reviewing your paper," he said quietly. Maya held his gaze. "That was fast." He nodded slightly. "It's not standard." "No," she said. It wasn't. A pause. He glanced briefly down the hallway, then back at her. "You should stay nearby," he added, "in case they need to speak with you." Maya studied him for a second, measuring the space between what he was saying and what he wasn't. Then she nodded once. "I'll be here." He gave a small, almost relieved nod before turning back toward the door. Maya remained where she was for a moment longer, then moved toward a bench along the wall, setting her bag down beside her before sitting. The wood was cool beneath her, solid, unyielding. Something real. Time passed. Not quickly, not slowly, just steadily. People moved through the hallway in waves, lawyers in suits, clerks carrying files, voices rising and falling in conversations that had nothing to do with her. But every now and then, a glance lingered, a second too long, enough to suggest word had already started to move. Inside the room, behind the closed door, something was happening. Maya didn't need to hear it to know. She sat with her hands resting loosely in her lap, the faint mark on her skin where the pen had struck still visible, a thin line that had darkened slightly. She traced it once with her thumb, not out of pain, but out of recognition. This happened. The door opened again. This time, it wasn't quiet. Voices came with it. Not loud, but sharper, tighter. That's not what the question asked. It answers it. It goes beyond it. That doesn't make it wrong. The exchange cut off as quickly as it had started when the door closed again. Maya didn't move, but she heard it. Every word. A few minutes later, footsteps approached again. Different this time. Slower. More deliberate. She looked up. Two people she hadn't seen before stepped into the hallway. Older. More composed. Their presence carried a different kind of authority. Not loud. Not performative. But unmistakable. One of them held a folder. They stopped in front of her. "Miss Williams?" Maya stood. "Yes." The woman with the folder studied her for a moment before speaking. "We've reviewed your examination." Maya met her gaze, steady. And a brief pause. Not hesitation. Consideration. "It's not what we expected," the woman said. Maya didn't react. "I didn't think it would be." The man beside her glanced down at the folder, then back at Maya. "Some of your conclusions are unconventional." Maya nodded slightly. "They follow the facts." Another pause. Then the woman spoke again, quieter this time. "You identified a pattern." Maya didn't look away. "Yes." The man shifted slightly, his tone more measured now. "That pattern aligns with concerns we've seen before." The words hung there. Not confirmation, but not dismissal either. Behind them, the door opened once more. Judge Whitmore stepped into the hallway. His presence changed the space immediately, the air tightening in a way that didn't need explanation. He looked at Maya, then at the two officials, then back at her. For a moment, no one spoke. Then he said, "We'll need to discuss this further." Maya held his gaze. "I'm not going anywhere." Another silence followed, but this one felt different, because for the first time since the exam began, the conversation wasn't happening around her. It was happening because of her. The hallway did not return to normal after Judge Whitmore stepped out. If anything, it tightened further. as if the space itself understood that whatever happened next would not stay contained within those walls. Maya remained standing, her posture steady, her gaze level, not confrontational, not yielding. The two officials did not move either. They didn't need to. The gravity of the moment held everyone exactly where they were. Whitmore was the first to break the silence. "We'll continue this inside," he said, his tone controlled, but lacking the certainty it had carried earlier. The woman with the folder didn't immediately agree. Her eyes remained on Maya for a second longer before she turned slightly toward him. "No," she said calmly. "We can begin here." A subtle shift passed through the hallway. Whitmore's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. The man beside her opened the folder, revealing Maya's exam. Pages marked, not heavily, but deliberately. "Your analysis identified a consistent misuse of judicial discretion," he said, glancing at Maya. "Not just within the hypothetical framework." Maya nodded once. Because it wasn't hypothetical. The words settled with a different kind of weight now. Whitmore stepped forward slightly. "That's an assumption," he said. Maya didn't turn to him. "No," she replied. "It's a conclusion based on the structure of the cases presented." The woman flipped one of the pages, her finger tracing a section Maya had written. "You connected the rulings," she said. "Showed how each one reinforced the next." "Yes. And you recommended review." Maya met Hargaze. "Yes." Another pause. Then, the man spoke again, more carefully this time. "We cross-referenced portions of your analysis with internal records." The hallway seemed to narrow. "And?" Maya asked. He closed the folder halfway, his expression measured. "You were right to question it." Whitmore's voice cut in immediately. "That doesn't mean." "It means," the woman interrupted, her tone still calm but firmer now, "that her conclusions are supported by existing concerns." Silence followed, not empty, decisive. Whitmore didn't speak again right away. For the first time, he looked at Maya not as someone beneath him, not as someone to control, but as a variable he had not accounted for. Maya didn't look away. "What happens now?" she asked. The question wasn't defiant. It was direct. The man and woman exchanged a brief glance. Something passed between them. Not uncertainty, but agreement. "We escalate," the woman said. Formally, Whitmore exhaled, slower this time. "You're overreacting," he said. "No," the man replied. "We're responding." The distinction hung there, clear, unavoidable. A door down the hallway opened and closed, the sound distant, almost irrelevant compared to the stillness that had settled between them. Maya shifted her weight slightly, not out of discomfort, but because the moment was moving forward, whether anyone was ready or not. The woman closed the folder completely now. "Miss Williams," she said, "your work doesn't just meet the standard for this position." A brief pause. "It exceeds it." Maya didn't react immediately, not because it didn't matter, but because she understood what it came with. Recognition wasn't neutral. Not here, not after everything that had just happened. The man added quietly, "We'd like to offer you a placement within the federal clerkship review program." Another pause, and, he continued, "We may request your assistance in reviewing related case material moving forward." Maya nodded slowly. "I understand." Whitmore finally spoke again, but his voice had changed. Less authority, more restraint. "This is premature," he said. "You're basing this on one exam." The woman turned to him. "No," she said. "We're basing this on what the exam revealed." A longer silence followed. Whitmore didn't argue again, because there was nothing left to argue without confirming what had already begun to surface. Maya picked up her bag from the bench, the familiar weight grounding her once more. She looked at the two officials, then briefly at Whitmore. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, just acknowledgement. Then she spoke. "Truth doesn't need permission," she said quietly. "It just needs to be written clearly enough that it can't be ignored." No one responded. They didn't need to, because the moment had already shifted beyond words. Maya turned and walked down the hallway, her steps steady, unhurried, moving forward without looking back. The courthouse stretched ahead of her, the same walls, the same doors, the same system, but it no longer felt closed. Not entirely. Behind her, conversations would continue. Decisions would be made. Investigations would begin. But none of that required her to stay. Because she had already done the one thing no one in that room had expected her to do. She had made the truth visible. This story reminds us that injustice often hides behind systems that appear fair on the surface, and that silence can be just as powerful as wrongdoing. Maya's journey shows that true strength is not just about talent, but about the courage to stand firm when everything around you is designed to break you. She did not fight with anger or noise, but with clarity, discipline, and truth. The lesson is simple but powerful. You may not always be given a fair chance, but if you know your worth and refuse to back down, your work can become the voice that forces others to finally see what they chose to ignore. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If it touched your heart, I would truly love to hear your thoughts on the storytelling, the emotional pacing, or whatever stayed with you after listening. Every comment you share helps make the next stories more honest, moving, and meaningful. And if you have a powerful or meaningful story of your own, please do not hesitate to send it to the channel. It may become the next story to touch and inspire thousands of others. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.